Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The future of BC's carbon tax is up in the air after a major policy reversal by the BC NDP. Leader David Eby says he would scrap the carbon tax if a federal requirement is lifted. What would that mean for your wallet and for climate action in BC? Call us now on that. And in half an hour, Brian Minter has some advice for avoiding winter weather damage to your plants, and he'll take your questions. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. There has been a change of heart from the BC NDP on the province's carbon tax. Premier David Eby announced at a campaign event yesterday that he would scrap BC's carbon tax for consumers, and that's if the federal government dropped its requirement for provinces to have one. In a statement from the NDP, he blamed decisions in Ottawa for politicizing the carbon tax and undermining support across the country. Reaction has been swift, both provincially and federally. And we're taking your calls and your reaction. What do you think of the BC NDP's reversal on the provincial carbon tax? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca. In a few minutes, we'll hear from the group Clean Energy Canada. Right now, we're joined by CBC's provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I can hear perhaps that might be a colleague of yours in the background there.
Yeah, it's a busy press gallery, so everyone's talking about the carbon tax reversal.
That's exactly right. Can you lay out for us the scene yesterday when this was announced? What happened and what did Eby say?
Well, it really was a bombshell announcement. The press conference scheduled in Vancouver yesterday was supposed to be about reproductive health care. Premier David Eby was joined by Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, and Premier had his wife, Dr. Kaylee Lynch, there to talk about women's reproductive rights. But the first question from the media was on the carbon tax because NDP leader Jagmeet Singh had come out earlier in the day saying he no longer supports a carbon tax that hurts working Canadians. So after 2 years of insisting that the carbon tax is the only way to fight climate change, we see a reversal from Eby, and he says if the federal government ends the legal backstop requiring provinces to collect the tax, he will stop it in BC. He maintained that there should be a price on carbon for big polluters, but because it wasn't a carefully planned out announcement, we don't have a lot of answers on what would replace the carbon tax on the fuel pumps, for example. Here's what Premier David Eby said about what he would like to see.
Context and the challenge for British Columbians has changed. A lot of British Columbians are struggling with affordability, and the political consensus that we had in British Columbia has been badly damaged by the approach of the federal government to this issue. Our commitment is that if the federal government decides to remove the legal backstop requiring us to have a consumer carbon tax in British Columbia, we will end the consumer carbon tax in British Columbia. And we will because we believe that climate change is real and not a hoax, and that we are required to take action on climate change for our kids, like baby Gwen, and for all of our communities. We will ensure that the big polluters pay the carbon price in our province to make sure that we're taking action on climate change while protecting people.
Okay, so that's Premier David Eby speaking yesterday, and he kind of he's still leaving it up to the federal government, right? Because it's up to whether the federal government removes that requirement that if you don't have your own as a province carbon tax, you're going to have one imposed on you. So he says, okay, if that is removed, we would remove the BC carbon tax. But he's talking about decisions in Ottawa, kind of blaming that for the negative connotations the carbon tax now has. How has that federal debate over the carbon tax impacted BC?
Well, I think it's a clever move. Eby's trying to point the finger at the federal government, saying they hold the cards. Eby was the only premier to defend the carbon tax. Other premiers across Canada have come out saying the situation have changed. Canadians are struggling with affordability. We can no longer afford to pass the cost on to them. I've been told by experts that even though some get a rebate through the carbon action tax credit, people don't know that they're getting the rebate. The rebate's not big enough. So people don't really realize that they are getting some money back, and it is income based. So it's lower to middle income people who are getting the money back. And of course, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is under pressure from Pierre Poilievre to axe the tax. That's now become the BC Conservative slogan as well. So Trudeau is under pressure. He has given concessions on the carbon tax to Atlantic provinces, for example, on home heating oil. So that seems to be what Eby is saying, is that the federal government has weakened the support from the carbon tax by exempting certain fuels, not exempting others. And that is the sort of the context under which this waning support has dwindled for the carbon tax.
I'm just going to take a call here before we go to the next question. Ted is joining us from Penticton. What do you think of this reversal on the carbon tax, Ted?
Well, I think it's typical of Mr. Eby to flip-flop in order to buy himself another 4 years of,
We're just having some trouble hearing you, Ted.
I'm sorry, how's that?
That's much better. Thank you. So
Okay,
it's about the election.
Well, I think it's entirely about the election. He's trying to buy his way back in for another 4 years, and I hope people recall he hasn't said a thing about any of this up until a month before the election. Other provinces have rolled this thing back without having any to worry about whatever the political fallout was in Ottawa. They've made moves to make it affordable to live in Canada. Mr. Eby has run up a massive deficit. Now he's trying to buy his way into another 4 years of putting this province in the poorhouse. And interestingly enough, all he's talking about is the consumer portion of the carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
If he's entirely thinking that that's going to fix everything as far as affordability goes, he's dreaming. He's going to increase the levels of carbon taxation on companies, which results in higher prices for all of us. So I guess my final comment would be, please, British Columbians, not that we have a huge choice here, but our choice would be either to keep Eby or to change our government, and hopefully it might get better. Thanks for taking my call.
Ted, thank you very much for calling. It's Ted in Penticton. We are taking your calls. What's your reaction to this policy reversal from the BC NDP on the provincial carbon tax? And Katie DeRosa is with me, our CBC Provincial Affairs reporter. In the clip from David Eby there, he made mention of, we believe in climate change. We don't think it's a hoax. Sounds like a dig, a not very subtle one at the BC Conservatives.
Yeah, so Premier David Eby is trying to have it both ways. He's trying to say we're going to remove, if we can, the consumer carbon tax, but still trying to get his attacks in on John Rustad, who has said climate change is not an emergency. John Rustad has said there are other pressing things like housing and healthcare and public safety that he thinks are more top of mind for British Columbians. But, again, I think Premier David Eby is going to struggle with this line because for example, the BC Greens have come out and said they are concerned about eroding climate change protections, and the Premier didn't have a clear vision of what's going to replace the carbon tax. So I think he's definitely trying to attack the BC Conservatives while still saying that the NDP is the party that will protect the environment. But John Rustad basically took credit for this reversal. He said, again, Eby has flip-flopped, and it's all because of pressure from the BC Conservatives. And here's what Rustad said.
Today we actually saw David Eby come out and he says he's going to be campaigning against his own government's policies. I find that quite incredible, and I guess what it comes down to is he's torn between two lovers, whether it is Jagmeet Singh or whether it is Mr. Trudeau in terms of his policies and approaches. The Conservative Party has been very clear and will always be very clear in terms of what we're doing. The carbon tax is harming people in this province. Carbon tax is causing huge problems with affordability, and the carbon tax will be removed by a Conservative government in British Columbia.
Now, what John Rustad told us here on this show is that he believes climate change is contributed to by human activity, but he doesn't believe it is at a crisis level, just to be clear on what he has said here on BC Today. Now, you mentioned the BC Green Party and criticism from them. What have we been hearing from the Greens on this?
Well, I talked to Sonia Furstenau yesterday, and she said it shows that the NDP has no firm stance on environmental issues, kind of alluding to the fact that the big climate action plan from the BC government was developed with the Green Partnership when the Supply and Confidence Agreement was in place before 2020. So, she's basically painting the NDP as a party with no strong values on the environment. Of course, we can look back to when the BC Liberals were in power and they brought in the carbon tax in 2008. At that time, when the NDP was in opposition, they were the ones who actually engineered the Axe the Tax
That's
slogan.
right.
So Pierre Poilievre can thank them for that. Carol James and John Horgan and Adrian Dix were all opposed to the initial carbon tax. So it is fair to say we've seen the NDP policy evolve. They haven't been firm on the carbon tax for their entire political lives.
Yeah, for those who have long memories. But we do have a clip of Sonia First to Know as well. Here it is.
It's really astonishing to me that what the NDP have done is taken what was widely supported, a carbon tax that was introduced in 2008 by the BC Liberals, had support across the province. And because they have tinkered with it, because they've made it less transparent, they've made it less easy to understand, they have lost that support and that consensus. That's not the fault of the opposition parties. That's the fault of the BC NDP, who have demonstrated again and again that they are actually on the side of big oil and gas.
So I basically think what this shows is how quickly the news cycle is moving in the election. We're getting announcements on the fly, like yesterday, and I think we can expect to see that as we are not even in the official campaign period. It doesn't launch until
You're
Saturday,
right.
and this news is flying. So let's be prepared for more surprise announcements, more reaction, more accusations of flip-flopping, more accusations of climate denial. That's going to be the theme of this election.
Good to have you taking us through all of this, Katie. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle.
That's the CBC's provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa. We are taking your reaction to this now. What do you think of this policy reversal on the carbon tax from the NDP? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Bonnie is next in Nelson. Hi, Bonnie. What do you think?
Oh, every time something adjusts, like what Premier Eby's is doing, is he's adjusting. He's not canceling the carbon tax. He's putting it where it needs to belong, on big business. We, the people who have to buy the gasoline and pay the tax, or it's on our shoulders, have been having to pay it just as well as the big, is on everybody. So this is not canceling it. But of course, the conservatives always say, oh, they've gone back on their own ideas. Well, it was a conservative idea, it was a liberal idea, whatever it was in the first place.
Okay.
And they'd scrap it for everybody because so big business gets off the hook too.
So thank you very much. That idea that, yes, the industrial carbon tax would remain. That's Bonnie and Nelson. Bill in Abbotsford, what do you think?
Oh, hey, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
So, I think, the sign of a good leader is someone who takes a topic that's not very popular and can convince people that it is a good idea. And I think the NDP is really missing the mark on differentiating themselves from everybody else. In my opinion, I think this carbon tax is a very fair tax. Everybody has to pay for it. If you live in a 17,000 square foot home or a 1,700 square foot home, you're obviously going to be paying more money to heat your home, to cool your home in that larger home than the person that's living in a smaller home. I just can't understand why they're flip-flopping on such an issue that I think is a no-brainer. And in regards to the, conservative leader saying that, there is climate change, but it's not really that bad. I like to have him talk to the people who live in Lytton, the people that live in Fort McMurray, the people that live in Jasper that have had their properties destroyed by all these forest fires that we're having. And, really just again, we have to do something, and the longer we prolong it, the worse it's going to get.
Bill, thank you very much for the call.
You're welcome. Thank
Take
you.
care. That's Bill in Abbotsford. Well, right now we're joined by Keith Brooks, Programs Director for Environmental Defence Canada. Keith, thanks so much for joining us. What was your own reaction when you heard the announcement from Premier Eby?
Well, it's upsetting that the carbon tax has become so politicized, and that, politicians all over the country are now, vowing to cancel it. I think really, though, the blame for this has to lie with all of the people who have intentionally misled Canadians about carbon price, that have poisoned the well, have poisoned people against this. I mean, in most of Canada, the carbon price gets rebated back to people. So in most provinces, 80% of families are better off. And in BC, as previous callers have said too, there are rebates available. They're means tested, so lower income, but the government was looking to increase those rebates. The carbon tax in BC is revenue neutral. It has a very small impact on people's household budgets, but it's really been weaponized by people who wanted to mislead everybody about the carbon price, and that's what's resulted in a retreat from carbon pricing across the country, and I guess now it's reached to BC as well.
Has that revenue neutrality changed, though, under the NDP over the years? And as we heard from Sonia first, now it's being obscured and more confusing for consumers that that there are rebates there, but also that idea of revenue neutrality, because there's criticism that it's actually going towards the government's general coffers.
Well, some of it, it does get rebated back. And then my understanding is that the rest of the money gets earmarked for measures related to climate change. So, BC has a number of measures where you can get an incentive to get an electric car. You can get an incentive to get a heat pump. There's also a bunch of stuff going on around clean transportation, building a clean electricity grid. I mean, all of these things, cost money, and some of the money that's raised from the carbon tax then goes towards helping individuals, helping industries, and helping, the government itself build the infrastructure that we need to get to net zero. I mean, we're trying to go through a transition here, and that means people need to make different choices. And so we want to make the cost of doing something that's carbon intensive higher, but we also want to make the costs of making the switch easier. And so, these incentives for heat pumps and electric cars and all that kind of stuff, analysis shows that, if people make those choices in their lives, they will save money. Like, taking climate action now at the individual level is about improving the affordability for people every day.
Let's take a call here and just get the opinion of Blake, who's on the line at Gibson's. My guest, by the way, is Keith Brooks with Clean Energy Canada. Hi, Blake. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, no problem.
And what do you think?
Well, I think it's a response to the conservative threat, the rise of the conservative movement, and the way the conservative movement is adapting and adopting a lot of the sort of the practices and principles that we're seeing south of the border. And the division between the two, the United Party and the BC Conservative Party, and the way those two parties have come together is also a response to that. And I think really federally, the Liberal government is confronting that the rise of the conservative threat themselves, and the dishonesty that your guest alluded to is part of that. And unfortunately, politics becomes cynical in the face of dishonesty, and we're seeing a response to that. It's certainly not an abandonment by the NDP, as one of your callers said. It's not that. It's really just everybody responding. I think it's going to do well for the Greens. I think Sonia's response was again, I wouldn't call it cynical, but typical of what a leader has to do in the antagonistic, politicized world that we live in. And I don't know where it'll all wash out, but clearly there's a threat from the climate, and there are those speaking against that threat as if it's not as bad as it is. But yeah, those forest fires tell a different story.
Okay, Blake, thank you very much for the call. Jim is next in the Thompson Valley. Hi, Jim.
Hello. The getting rid of the carbon tax will have economic and environmental disruptions. One thing that I'm concerned about is the government brings in a lot of revenue from the carbon tax that goes to fund social programs and income tax reductions, from what I understand from past history. So if you get rid of the carbon tax, you might expect your income taxes to go up. or social programs to be cut.
To make up for that loss in revenue.
Exactly. And there are ways of gaining back that loss in revenue by perhaps putting a special fee on gas-guzzling vehicles, for example. A special fee on the license plates yearly. Instead of the regular fee, you might pay $200 a year extra if you're using a gas guzzler that gets X amount of miles per gallon.
So it's about your use, putting penalties on the amount of use and how much you're putting out in emissions. Thank you very much. Let's go back to Keith Brooks here. What do you want to say to people then who are worried about affordability? It has become a major issue leading up to this provincial election and then the federal election. So what do you say to people who worry about affordability, what's in their wallet, and see this plan, the promises from various parties when it comes to the carbon tax, and think that's going to make things more affordable for me?
I mean, the carbon tax was done in BC and then adopted nationally because a bunch of economists said this was the most cost-effective way to fight climate change. Like it was going to cost the least to deliver the greatest amount of emissions reductions. And so, I think your caller is right. I mean, if you're not going to have the carbon tax, then you need to have something else in place. And that doesn't just, change the revenue situation for the government, but it means like, what's the other policy? And is that policy going to be as cost effective as carbon pricing? But I think, the idea of the carbon pricing is that it is a tax that you were supposed to evade, actually. You're supposed to try to not pay the carbon tax by making low carbon decisions. And so, people that are facing real issues around affordability, and we know that it's real. It's real in BC, it's real across this country. The carbon price has a very small impact on that. And a lot of it's mostly inflation coming out of COVID. And a lot of that's actually been driven by the high prices of fossil fuels, of gasoline and of heating fuels and things like that is driven by a bunch of global factors, really, right?
Thank you so much for joining us for this. It sounds like we will continue to do so. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Keith Brooks, Programs Director at Environmental Defence Canada. 12:28 now. And lots of emails are coming in on this. Teresa writes, that is a huge mistake by David Eby. The carbon tax has been shown time and again to reduce emissions. Most people get more money back than they pay, especially lower income folks. Where is his evidence that he's going to make the big polluters pay? In Alberta and in BC, the big oil and gas industries don't even pay their municipal taxes. In Alberta in 2023, the arrears were over $250 million. This is data from the Pembina Institute. Disgraceful. Doug writes, no carbon tax, no rebate, low-income folks will be worse off. Dan writes, look, climate change is not a hoax. The climate is changing, absolutely. We need to control the climate. We need to figure out how to adapt, and taking money out of our pocket just to put it back into our pockets is not the solution. Thank you very much for your emails. That's bctoday@cbc.ca. We're going to have a lot more coverage on this, of course, throughout the day here on CBC. And again, more coverage and follow-up on policy reversal from David Eby and the BC NDP on the carbon tax. And he says if Ottawa were to remove the federal requirement for provinces to have a carbon tax, the NDP would remove the provincial carbon tax here in BC. Much more throughout the day here on CBC. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for joining us. And coming up next, Brian Minter will take your gardening questions. That's right after the CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The provincial government says it's implementing the recommendations of an external review of the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital after one of its patients allegedly stabbed 3 people in Vancouver while on unescorted leave. The 7 recommendations include a team consisting of a psychiatrist, a nurse, and a social worker be assigned to each patient to improve communication. The review also suggests implementing more structured policies to improve decision-making around leaves. Air Canada passengers at YVR and other airports around the country are getting increasingly concerned about a shutdown. The airline is preparing for the possibility of a pilot strike or a lockout next Wednesday. That means flights could begin to be cancelled as early as today. And Premier David Eby is once again committing to scrapping BC's carbon tax if the federal government dropped its requirement for the law. Eby says the change would help address affordability for British Columbians. And now the forecast on the north coast. Periods of rain this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs reaching 20 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a few showers with a high of 16. Highs around 20 with some sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a chance of showers with a high of 22. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a few showers this afternoon with highs around 17 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. That is Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. The 44th annual Terry Fox Run takes place on Sunday. Now, yesterday, we spoke to Daryl Fox, Terry's brother and senior advisor to the Terry Fox Research Institute. You called and shared your memories and what Terry Fox's legacy means to you, and we got some incredibly heart-rending emails. Karen writes, I'm an American who was an exchange student in Quebec in 1981. When I was 15 in 1980, at the same time my father had been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. I had started following Canadian news, and I remember learning about Terry and his run and how much his quest meant to me. From far away in Aberdeen, Washington, my mother and I cheered him on as my dad continued his own chemo treatments. We sought out news of his quest across Canada. I still have clippings of his journey. Terry's run was a bright spot for us at a sad time. My father died in March of 1981, and I remember when Terry passed away. Both were sad days for us. Terry brought so much awareness to how living with cancer did not have to mean stopping our quests. I later went on to work at a cancer treatment in Seattle, influenced by both of these experiences. My condolences and blessings to his family ahead of the 44th annual charity run in his honor. And Michael writes, my daughter Ursula Joy died of a rare brain cancer at the age of 7 in 2018. She was initially diagnosed with a massive cranial tumor at the age of 18 months. Ursula is buried near our home on Hornby Island. Every year, the Hornby Island Community School has a Terry Fox Run. Over half of the children at the school say they are running for Ursula. Thank you so much for your emails. Really appreciate hearing from you both and sharing your stories. It's 12:34 now, and BC Today's gardening columnist Brian Minter is back to take your questions about all things gardening. And you can call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And Brian Minter joins me now from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Hello there, Brian.
Oh, hi, Michelle. Here we are still in summer, technically. Fall isn't that far away. But one of the things that is really important in going back to all the losses that virtually everybody across the province had last year, I would say up to 25% or more of people's plants didn't make it through the winter. And here we are in autumn, the hot summers, winding down, getting into fall. People love to plant at this time of year, putting things in. But we don't want anybody to suffer the same fate in spite of what weather might do for us in the wintertime. So there's a few things I think we can all do that are really important in terms of making sure our plants get through the winter. And Michelle, can I just run through some of these because I think they're awfully important?
Yes.
Number one is the hardiness zone. All of us throughout the province, or check with your local garden stores if you're not sure, because the plants that are hardy for your particular area, if you plant those hardiness ratios, if it were zone 6 in the eastern Fraser Valley, we're not going to put zone 7 plants in. We can put zone 5 plants in, but zone 6 are colder.
Right.
And overall, we should always be fine. The second thing, and this is really important, folks don't realize, the soil. If it's more open and porous and well drained, you're going to find a remarkable difference in terms of the survivability of plants. Part of the problem is we'll get heavy periods of rain. Suddenly a cold spell comes in. The water sits around the roots, and many perennials in particular, and other trees and shrubs where the water is sitting down below, this is where the roots get damaged. So open, porous, well drained soil. And I love putting a fir mulch when we plant our trees, not on top, in the ground, and the sawdust as well, if you like, to open up heavier soils. That makes a huge difference. The other thing is, all of us, no matter where we live, are going to find from the northeasterly direction is where most of our cold originates. Certainly in the eastern Fraser Valley, it's famous. It closes the freeways when we have snow. But if you can put plants out of that, very cold prevailing winds in the wintertime, that's good. Or, as many folks are doing right now, plant a windbreak. Put in a hedge, fencing, that type of thing. Whatever you want to do between, and sometimes neighbors working together can, do some creative things, but stop the wind from being so harsh in your garden, in particular in the winter. And Michelle, here's a big one. So many people lost their roses, not realizing the fact that most of the traditional roses, the hybrid teas and the floribundas and the grandifloras, have a graft on the bottom. It's a little bit of a knot on the bottom, and that needs to be covered with mulch. No matter how cold we get, if you protect that bud union on the bottom, you're going to be okay. Like, we shouldn't have lost any of our traditional roses just by mulching. Would have made all the difference in the world. And I would say about a foot or 12 inches over top would be great. The other thing, we keep talking all through the year about insulate and what a great insulating cloth this is, because people are using burlap. Burlap really has no insulating value. The insulate cloth, which is quite inexpensive, by the way, has a 10 degrees Celsius rating, and all you do is wrap it around your containers, your plants and whatever, only when we get that particularly cold out there, and what a difference it makes as well. And if you're doing containers, remember, because they're perennial plants you're putting in containers, mostly in trees and shrubs, you need a special soil that's more open and porous at the same time when you're doing that. So by doing these few things and keeping in mind, listen to CBC radio, because we'll have a good sense of when cold spells are coming.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, these are just a few key things that will help amazingly save plants where we lost them last year. Because fall is for planting. People are out putting color in, putting things in for pollinators and birds for the wintertime, and those are all good things. Just make sure they're hardy for your particular zone, and really we'll be absolutely fine.
Okay, so your plant hardiness zone, open, porous soil, protect it from the wind, and mulch those roses, and insulate, not burlap. Now, do you know, or can you tell us, would fallen leaves that we may be looking at right now, would that work as mulch or insulating?
Oh, absolutely. Rose trees, you bring up a very important point, where the graft is 2 or 3 feet above the ground, wrapping a bit of wire fencing around your rose tree, and just put leaves in the side. It's a wonderful insulating. We used it all the time in our gardens because we had so many leaves. We used it everywhere. So thank you, Michelle.
There
Good
we
on
go.
you. Yeah, you're adding one more item here. Good.
It was a question from my colleague, Rachel Adams, so I can't take credit for that. And now she's excited because she doesn't have to buy insulate, and she could just use her fallen leaves.
That's right.
Let's take a call here for Brian Minter. Our number again is 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. And Scott is on the line from Kimberley. Hi, Scott. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, what's your question?
I have an apple tree in my garden that's starting to block the sun. I'd like to transplant it, but I'm just wondering if it's even worth it. It's about 8.5 feet tall. It's in soft ground. It's not like it's in a garden area, and the circumference of it is probably about 12 inches. I'm just wondering if it's even worth it to try.
Yeah, Scott, it is worth it to try. The timing is very important. Wait till at least mid-November. That's generally when the leaves are off the tree, when it's completely dormant. And, you may need a little help in doing this. You've got a diameter of 12 inches, but I'm sure it's about 4 inches across in terms of the diameter of the tree. And so, no, I would go out at least have a 3-foot root system. At least 3 feet would be good. That means you're going to have a heavier tree and basically just dig a trench going around the tree, breaking the roots, so you've got something that's stable. And you may need some equipment, hand trucks or whatever, or bobcat or whatever you could have in terms of machinery to help lift it. It's going to be a 500-600 pound tree at least. But no, totally movable. And I wish we'd known this a year ago, Scott, because what we normally do is if we're going to dig a bigger tree, the winter prior, we actually dig a trench around, break all the roots, and then all kinds of new roots form, which are more mobile and easy to get out of the ground. But in any case, I think you have probably a 99% chance of survival if you can get that good root system out, get it out, and have good soil in which to plant it, adding a little bark in there to help pull your new roots out. So yeah, I think it's quite possible, Scott. If I was there, I'd give you a hand.
Okay, and should I put any fertilizer in like the new hole to mix in with the soil?
I would say no. That it's not enough to make a significant difference. Once you get bark, or if you have sawdust for a hemlock into the planting hole, that's good at encouraging new roots to develop. The one thing we do use is it's a root starter that is liquid, and once it's planted and watered in, then use some liquid starter because that will help. It's meant specifically to help regenerate new roots. That's what I would use after planting.
There you go. You sure you want to commit to that, Brian? That's a big job.
Absolutely. I'd love to help Scott. Yeah.
Scott, thank you so much. So big job, but worth it to transplant your apple tree. Andrew is next now in Nelson. Hi, Andrew.
Hi there.
Hi. What's your question for Brian Minter?
I have a metasequoia tree that I bought from a nursery. I think it was about 5 years old. Put it in. This is the second summer I've had it. Mm-hmm. And it's just not quite thriving. It looks a little sickly. It's got some browning of the needles, and the green color of the needles is kind of pale. And yeah, it's just not quite taking off.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Now, they do take, was it in a container or was it when you bought it?
In a container.
Or was it a
ball?
Yeah, that's what I was really getting at.
Delivered on the truck, and I cut the strings that were around the root ball when I put it in the hole, and yeah.
Okay, that helps me a lot. It was a balled and burlap tree, and everybody has a different technique, and I totally get that. But in my opinion, never ever cut the burlap strings around a burlap tree. It's holding all the root system together. And when you dig a tree, it's severe for the tree in terms of being moved, Andrew, but essentially leave everything together, root ball, and only when it's planted, if it has nylon twine, natural twine is okay, but nylon twine would have to be cut at that time, but the soil is holding it together. So it got a little bit of a rough start. And in my opinion right now, without saying things, I think it's going to be okay. It's surviving at least. And now we need to do a couple of things. If it was me, I would get some bark mulch, fir hemlock, or sawdust, and it would work it around the drip line of the tree. It's amazing how that draws and pulls more roots out and gets it established. And Andrew, what have you been feeding the tree?
I have to admit, I can't recall the fertilizer numbers, but I was recommended at the nursery this spring, and I sprinkled it around the base. Just once.
Yeah. It's got something,
general purpose.
Yeah, in my opinion, the tree's roots are taking a little bit longer because it was dug to get established. It is going to be okay. It needs nutrient. We talked to Scott a few minutes ago about using a liquid root booster, it's called. That would certainly help. But, next spring, when the leaves start opening up, I mean, it's one of the unusual trees that metasequoias are crazy unusual. They're beautiful. But I would use a slow-release nitrogen fertilizer. Even a 14-14-14 would be fine. But get some time-release fertilizer on to see if we can't get some nutrient onto those new roots. And I think, in my opinion, Andrew, it's just going to get better and better. I see no problems at all. Just a difficulty in transplanting, but it's going to be great.
Okay, so next spring you're saying that, Brian?
Yeah. Even
the
now,
pushing,
though,
pushing,
at this
pushing.
time of year, I would love you to use some sawdust or bark to work it in around the root system. And what I would love to do also is if you can get root booster around the tree. Right now, it's a liquid. That really helps roots, especially over the fall and winter months, because even though the tree may be dormant, the roots are active all winter long. So if we can get some liquid root booster on that, Andrew, it'll make a huge difference.
Really supporting those roots, and they are beautiful. So good luck
Yep.
to you, and hope you see results from that, Andrew. Thank you very much. Tiago is next now with a question for Brian in Vancouver. Hi, Tiago.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Brian. Thank you for taking this call. My question for Brian is, I live like in the West and like in an apartment, and I have a lot of indoor plants. And this is the time of the year that we are worried about all the plants, the growth that we had during this beautiful summer. So just wondering, like, if you have some special advice about lighting. I've been investing a lot on those like indoor lights for plants, but we never know how to use it. Like I have a huge banana tree, like 3 years old, that I cultivate through like lighting. But it's always good to hear from a specialist.
Yeah, okay, Tiago, thank you for that question, because that is really relevant for so many people right now, because we are all bringing a lot of indoor plants, which we've had for the summertime, back inside right now. And the conditions are tough for them. They're happy being outside, but the conditions inside, and quite frankly, we're pretty good now, but they're going to deteriorate. We're getting less light. And when the heat starts to come on from our furnaces, we're getting a little chillier. They take humidity away, and they're not in a happy place anymore. So 3 things are absolutely important. First of all, when you do bring them in, make sure that you check very carefully. Don't bring a lot of passengers in, insects, and so check them out carefully. Use an organic spray like Trout's on your plants once you bring them in, to be able to make sure we're insect free. Second thing is, as close as you can get them to a window, preferably east window or north window, really get them as much light as you possibly can. Then as the light gets lower as we go through winter, they're at least getting that minimum light to the window. The second thing is keeping your temperatures in your home. If you could run them a little bit cooler, or if you have a heat vent near a window, shut it down. So keep the plants as cool as you possibly can. That's the most important thing. And because they've been quite humid outside and beautiful weather, Tiago, what I would do is take a mister bottle, and I would mist the plants with water. It just maybe 2 or 3 times a day. That little humidity you put back around the leaves, and many plants are quite susceptible to spider mites. The spider mites hate water. It's the best control there is. So misting with this warm water would help them. So those 3 things are the best things we could possibly do. And you'd mentioned it, which I thought was very smart, is if you can get extra lighting, even a fluorescent tube. There's a lot of individual units you can find in garden stores where you simply plug them in, and they are basically plant lights, which have the full spectrum of light. They would help immensely anywhere around the plant. Not so much right now, but as we really start losing our light later in October, that would be a wonderful thing as well. But keep them, by the way, good point, don't overwater them. Keep them just moist, because when they're struggling, they don't want to be sitting in water. And we have to remember, water is important. And when water goes into our containers, it pushes all the oxygen out, and they can't breathe. So give them a drink, and make sure we have those well-drained soils, and certainly no repotting this time of year. Keep things in the same size pot as you possibly can through the winter. So you brought up a very good point, Tiago. Thank you.
Really, really good point. And I'm picturing, he mentioned being in the west end of Vancouver, just big, beautiful windows, and thinking about the kind of light that he can give to his plants in there. A big banana tree in your apartment. Imagine that. Those gorgeous leaves. Jen is next now in Vancouver. Hi, Jen. And what did you want to ask Brian about?
Hi, I have a white wonder dogwood tree that is in the front of my house, which faces west. And I didn't start really regularly watering it until midsummer. And I see that the leaves have curled, and at the very top of the tree, there's a few groups of browned leaves. And I'm guessing it's from heat stress. I'm not totally sure, but if so, is there a way I can remedy that without having to transplant it.
Oh, Jen, I think you can. How big is the tree right now, and how long have you had it?
Well, when the developer had planted it, it was about 1.5 feet. And now that was 2 years ago, and now it is about 10 feet tall.
Okay.
9 or 10.
Good. That helps an awful lot. And by the way, folks don't know this. H.M. Eddy had a nursery in Vancouver, and he's the one that developed the White Wonder dogwood. So it's one of our BC natives that was crossed with an Eastern dogwood, and it's one of the best. And I look forward to the beautiful red fall color as well as the flowers. But Jen, to come right back to it here, a thorough deep watering around the drip line of the tree where the outside branches right now, in spite of the rain we're going to get, there's allegedly going to be that much. So a thorough deep watering right now would help an awful lot. It really would. And I don't think you need to do much of this. We don't want to fertilize it, give it nutrient right now, because it's starting to, shut down for winter. It'll be dropping its leaves in a month or month and a half. So I think just basically a good deep watering is all you really need to do right now. And you're right, the heat stress, especially if the plant is dry. And Jen, more than any other year, so many folks have phoned me and said, look, I'm getting burning on the tops of my trees this year. And because we were getting cool, kind of coolish weather, then suddenly we would get extremely hot weather, 30, 33 degrees, and the plant couldn't get enough water from the bottom to, look after those top branches. And that's where a lot of the burning and stress was coming from. So just right now, thorough deep watering, and I think you'd be absolutely fine, Jen. Honestly, I do. You don't have to move the tree. It's going to be okay. And you can also, when we look at a 10-foot tree, you should be able to look in the tips of the branches right now, and you can see the tiny red of the blooms forming for next year.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. That sounds good. So no need to transplant.
Nope.
Just give it a good watering. Thank you, Jen. Anthony is next at Harrison Hot Springs. Hello, Anthony.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call, Brian.
Delighted.
My question is about laurels. So in Harrison and Agassiz, there's a lot of my neighbors that have laurels, and I put some in 5 years ago from your nursery, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the last 5 years to get them to where they are, and some neighbors that have 10, 15, and 20-year hedges. And most of us lost the majority of our hedges this winter. I think it was because of the early warm weather that started, I guess, some new growth, and then we had that really cold snap. But more than anything, I think, was the biting cold wind that we get in the Fraser. So if you're minus 15 and then you get that 40, 50 mile an hour wind, I could literally watch my leaves turn brown as that wind was tearing at them.
Wow.
And I was just wondering, so many of my neighbors lost like almost the entirety of their hedges. I think I talked to you at one point and you told me that I had to prune very aggressively. So I did. I pruned everything that was dead right out, and they did come back a lot better than most that didn't prune theirs out. So my main question is, what can I do, and what can I tell my neighbors and fellow laurel owners to do to protect their laurels this winter?
Anthony, very good question and very relevant question right now. They're the English laurels, and Ravani, it is not the hardiest laurel, and every once in a while, all through the history of the Fraser Valley, every time we get a bad winter, and I've even seen them frozen to the ground where they come back out of the ground again. But two things. Number one is after the new reality of our climate change, we need to look at changing the varieties. So if you're planting or considering planting a laurel, we need to use the Russian laurel, which is the Prunus ravani. Ravani doesn't have a scratch on it, and it looks similar, longer, darker green leaves is all it is. So in the future, look for ravani. But in the meantime, to solve the problem is when we get those outflow winds, and we talked earlier in the program about using this insulate cloth, and all we have to do, and Anthony, we use it everywhere in our own nursery, basically to make sure that we, in fact, if it gets severely cold, we just wrap the pots or we wrap the trees with insulate. And it comes in a 6-foot wide roll, wherever you can buy it, and whatever length you like. So just tie it, secure it to the north part or the northeast part of a lot of your laurel hedge. And just for those few days when it's really cold, the wind won't blow it away, because we've done this before. And that's all you need to do, because that will stop the intensity of the wind. It'll make a 10 degrees Celsius difference, diffuse the wind. And really, that it's a piece of cake. You can do that.
There you go.
Thank you
I'm
so
sure Brian also just loved hearing you say you've given blood, sweat, and tears to take care of the hedges that you got from his nursery.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You report back to your neighbors, okay? Take care, Anthony.
Thank you.
I love that he's watching out for his neighbors as well.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
We're very community. In the Eastern Valley, we look after each other. You bet.
That's absolutely true. Brian, thank you very much. What are you up to next week?
Oh, so a lot of speaking and sharing kind of the new things. We've been to 3 different shows this year, from Europe to Eastern U.S. and to Western, the Far West show. Lots of wonderful ideas that are coming out in our industry, and big to go out and share them with so many of our gardening community. It's just really fun. And we've got some great gardening communities and clubs in the Lower Mainland, and they're just wonderful folks. So yeah, we're sharing a lot of information this week.
I know you were busy this past week as well.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to stop for you, does it?
No, I love it.
Brian, thank you so much as always. You have a great weekend, okay?
You too, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Real pleasure. Brian Minter is our longtime BC Today gardening columnist here on the show, and he joined us from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Yes, the community of the Eastern Fraser Valley. Do join us next Tuesday. My guest will be Biff Naked. She will take your call. She's celebrating the first album she's releasing in 15 years. Join us for that.